Have you ever bought a plant because it seemed beautiful? You put it in the garden with all the hope in the world, and months later you discovered it was a problem you had no idea how to solve. You are not the only one. Every year, thousands of gardeners throughout Latin America unknowingly plant species that destroy foundations, poison pets, invade neighboring gardens, or are directly fatal to children. In this video, I show you the 10 most popular plants you should never have in your garden and explain exactly why. Some you know, some you probably have right now, and at least one of them will surprise you because nobody talks about it. Number 4 can break pipes and asphalt in silence for years without you noticing until the damage is irreparable. And number 8 is considered one of the most toxic plants in the world. Yet it is still sold normally in nurseries without any visible warning. Stay until the end, because the last one on the list is responsible for real deaths in Latin America, and you have probably seen it growing in some nearby garden without knowing what it was. Giant reed. At first glance, it seems like the perfect solution for creating a quick visual barrier. It grows several meters in a single season. It forms a dense screen that blocks the wind and the view of neighbors, and its hollow stems have that Mediterranean look that many gardens seek. The problem is what happens below the ground. And what happens below the ground with Arundo donax is a nightmare that gardeners discover too late. Its system of rhizomes, horizontal underground roots that extend in all directions, can reach several meters in depth and tens of meters in lateral extension in a few years. Those rhizomes are extraordinarily resistant. They tolerate fire, extreme drought, and most conventional herbicides. Once established, complete removal can require years of systematic work or heavy machinery. In many documented cases in Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina, owners who planted Arundo donax as a decorative barrier ended up discovering that the roots had reached the foundations of the house, the water pipes, and the perimeter walls. The structural damage it produces is not immediate. It is silent and progressive. During the first 2 or 3 years, the plant grows upward and seems perfectly contained. It is from the 4th or 5th year, when the rhizome system has reached critical density, that the problems begin to appear. Cracks in pavements, clogged pipes, walls that give way. By that time, the plant already occupies a territory that is practically impossible to recover without major intervention. As an invasive plant, Arundo donax is listed as one of the most problematic species in riparian ecosystems throughout America. It reproduces by stem fragments that water carries downstream, colonizing riverbanks and displacing native vegetation with devastating efficiency. In California, Texas, and northern Mexico, its control in rivers and streams costs millions of dollars annually in eradication programs. Planting Arundo donax in a private garden, even if it is far from any watercourse, is actively contributing to that problem. If what you are looking for is a quick visual barrier, there are alternatives that offer the same aesthetic effect without any of those risks. Potted bamboo, Miscanthus sinensis, or tall ornamental grasses are options that give the same visual result with completely different management. There is a legal detail that many are unaware of. In several municipalities in Mexico, Argentina, and Chile, the owner of a garden is legally responsible for invasive species that originate on their property and expand to neighboring lands or protected natural areas. That means that planting Arundo donax and allowing it to spread can have consequences that go beyond the garden. Fines, the obligation of eradication at the owner's expense, and in extreme cases, civil liability for damages caused to adjacent ecosystems. Tree of Heaven. In cities throughout Latin America, there is a tree that grows in the cracks of sidewalks, between the bricks of walls, in abandoned lots, on the edges of train tracks, on any surface where no other plant would survive. That ability to thrive in extreme conditions which at first glance seems admirable, is exactly the problem. Ailanthus altissima has no biological limits to stop it, and when it enters a garden, it doesn't leave alone. Originally from northern China, this tree was introduced in the 18th century as an ornamental plant and as food for silkworms. It was quickly discovered that it was not useful for sericulture. The worms rejected it, but by that time it had already escaped from gardens and colonized half the world. Today, it is listed as an invasive species in more than 30 countries and appears on multiple lists of the most problematic plants on the planet. What makes it especially difficult to manage in the garden are two combined characteristics. First, it produces up to 300,000 seeds per year, each winged and capable of flying tens of meters with the wind. Second, its roots secrete an allelopathic substance, ailanthone, which inhibits the germination and growth of plants around it. In practice, that means that under an adult ailanthus, nothing else grows. The garden surrounding it becomes sterile ground for any other species. The smell of its leaves and flowers is another problem that nurseries never mention. When the leaves are crushed, or simply when the wind moves them, they give off a penetrating aroma that many people describe as rancid or similar to burnt peanuts. On hot days with little air circulation, that smell can permeate an entire garden for hours. If you already have a young specimen, the time to act is now. Young trees can be removed with hand tools if the entire root is extracted. Any root fragment left in the ground regrows. Adult specimens require cutting and immediate treatment of the stump with high-concentration herbicide because the regrowth capacity of the ailanthus after cutting is so aggressive that without that treatment, the tree can regenerate with more vigor than before. An aspect that aggravates the problem is that Ailanthus altissima actively harbors invasive insects that use its stems and branches as a refuge and breeding point. In areas where it coincides with the presence of the brown marmorated stink bug, an agricultural pest of Asian origin that is expanding in America, the tree of heaven acts as a reservoir that facilitates the survival and dispersal of the insect. Planting ailanthus is not just a problem for one's own garden, it is potentially a problem for crops and gardens in the entire surrounding area. I want to pause you here at this moment in the video. If you have been working on your garden for a long time, choosing plants, caring for them, investing time and money, and yet some do not respond as you expect, or problems appear that you do not understand where they come from. Most likely, there are management details that no one explained to you, not serious errors, small details that make all the difference between a plant that prospers and one that becomes a problem. Those details are gathered in the digital book, The Great Secret Behind a Resilient Plant. It is not general theory. It is concrete information applicable from day one. How to read the state of a plant before the damage is visible. What signals indicate that something is wrong in the substrate or in the irrigation. How to make planting decisions that avoid the mistakes we are seeing in this video. Download it now using the link in the pinned comment just below this video. Access is available at a promotional price for a limited time. Pampas grass. There are few plants that have gone so quickly from ornamental fashion to prohibited species as Cortaderia celoana. For decades, its large white and silver plumes were a symbol of designer gardens throughout Latin America and Europe. Today it is included in the catalogs of invasive species of multiple countries, and its planting is expressly prohibited in some regions of Spain, Chile, and Argentina, precisely the countries where it spread the most. The invasion mechanism of this grass is aerial and massive. A single adult plant can produce up to 1 million seeds per season. Those seeds are light, winged, and can travel with the wind up to 30 km from the mother plant. In areas with prevailing wind, coasts, open valleys, mountain slopes, a single plant in a garden can populate the natural lands of an entire neighborhood, with cortidaria in a few years. What complicates the situation is that young plants are difficult to identify before they form the characteristic large clump. They grow like any ornamental grass during the first 2 years, and by the time the plume appears and the problem becomes evident, the plant has already produced seeds for at least one season. The leaves have another problem that nurseries rarely warn about. Their edges are extremely sharp, so sharp that they can produce deep cuts in the skin with a simple touch when passing by. In gardens with children or pets, that physical risk is added to the ecological problem. Removal requires full protective clothing, and burning, which some people use as a control method, is contraindicated because the heat stimulates the germination of seeds stored in the soil around the plant. If you are looking for the same visual effect of a large grass without the risks, Miscanthus sinensis in sterile varieties or Pennisetum alopecuroides are alternatives that offer similar visual presence without documented invasive capacity. The reason why Cortidaria celoana continues to be sold in nurseries, despite being prohibited in several countries, is simple. It is profitable. Its plumes are visually spectacular at the point of sale, it sells well, and the nursery assumes no responsibility for what happens after the purchase. That disconnection between the moment of sale and the long-term consequences is the model that keeps many problematic plants circulating in the market. And that is exactly why, as a gardener, you need this information before arriving at the nursery, not after. Japanese knotweed. There is a plant that can break the asphalt of a road, pierce the concrete slab of a house, and force open buried PVC pipes. And it does it slowly, in silence, for years, until the damage is so extensive that the repair costs more than the original construction. Fallopian japonica, known as Japanese knotweed, is that plant. And although its distribution center in Latin America is still limited compared to Europe, its presence is growing in gardens in Chile, Argentina, and Colombia in a worrying way. Its underground system is the most aggressive of any ornamental plant available in nurseries. The rhizomes can grow up to 3 meters deep and extend 7 meters horizontally from the central stem. Those rhizomes are extremely resistant. A fragment 2 centimeters long is enough to regenerate a complete plant. That means that trying to eliminate it by digging, the first reaction of most gardeners, can worsen the problem by fragmenting the rhizomes and multiplying the points of regrowth. In the United Kingdom, where the species is completely established, the presence of Fallopian japonica on a property can make it impossible to obtain a mortgage to buy the house. Banks consider it a structural risk, equivalent to a serious crack in the foundations. That fact, more than any botanical description, illustrates the real scale of the problem it represents. Effective control requires repeated applications of systemic herbicide for at least 3 consecutive years, with constant monitoring of any regrowth. Physical removal without herbicide is possible, but it requires a level of persistence and precision that few people are prepared to maintain for the necessary time. All plant material, stems, leaves, rhizomes, must be disposed of in sealed bags and taken to a controlled landfill, never to compost, because any fragment can regenerate a new plant. What makes Fallopian japonica particularly worrying in the Latin American context is that its distribution in the region is still in an early expansion phase. In Europe, where it has been established for more than 150 years, control costs already exceed €165 million annually in the United Kingdom alone. Latin America is at the moment when it is still possible to prevent that scenario, but every garden that plants it unknowingly is an expansion point that makes the problem harder to reverse. Mimosa acacia. When it blooms in winter with its clusters of fragrant yellow flowers, Acacia dealbata is one of the most photographed plants in Mediterranean and subtropical gardens. That seasonal beauty, which lasts barely 3 or 4 weeks a year, is exactly the trap. Behind that spectacular flowering, there is an invasion machine that works without pause during the other 11 months. Acacia dealbata has 3 simultaneous expansion mechanisms that make it practically impossible to contain once established. The first is the massive production of seeds, up to 20,000 per plant per year, which can remain viable in the soil for decades. The second is vegetative reproduction by roots. The rhizomes extend far from the main tree and generate new stems spontaneously. The third and most difficult to control is its post-fire behavior. Fire does not eliminate it, it stimulates it. Seeds stored in the soil germinate massively after a fire, and the stumps regrow with a vigor that can exceed the growth of the original tree. In Galicia, northern Spain, and central Chile, areas where the species is completely naturalized, Acacia dealbata forms monospecific masses that completely exclude native vegetation. The forests of oak, chestnut, and native species that existed before are replaced by pure acacia, without understory, without diversity, without associated fauna. That process, once initiated, is virtually irreversible without sustained human intervention. In addition to its invasive behavior, Acacia dealbata produces a massive amount of highly allergenic pollen during its flowering. In areas where it is naturalized, pollen levels during the weeks of flowering can several times exceed the thresholds that trigger symptoms in people with respiratory allergies. There is also an impact on the water cycle that few people know about. Acacia dealbata is a species of very high water consumption. Its deep and extensive roots extract water from the soil at a rate that can significantly reduce water availability for native plants and surrounding crops. In areas with seasonal drought or limited access to water, the presence of invasive acacias in the hills and ravines can translate into springs that diminish or disappear, directly affecting the water supply of communities that depend on those sources. From what city or country are you watching us? Tell us in the comments. And also, tell us if you recognized any of these plants in your garden or in your neighborhood. Blue Morning Glory. Ipomoea indica is one of those plants that no one buys with bad intentions. Its blue-violet flowers with 5 petals are genuinely beautiful. Its fast growth makes it attractive for covering walls and fences, and its resistance to heat makes it a tempting option in warm climates. The problem appears when that ease of growth becomes impossible to control. And with Ipomoea indica, that point arrives sooner than anyone expects. Classified as invasive in multiple countries in America, Australia, and the Pacific Islands, this convolvulaceous plant has the ability to climb over any plant around it and cover it completely, blocking the light and literally suffocating it. In gardens with established trees, shrubs, and ornamental plants, an uncontrolled Ipomoea indica can cause the death of neighboring plants in a single active growing season. Its stems do not have tendrils. They wrap directly around the stems of other plants with a pressure that, in young plants, can even strangle them. Reproduction is double, by seed and by stem fragments that root easily in moist soil. That means that pruning remains that fall to the ground can become new plants if they are not collected and disposed of correctly. In gardens with regular irrigation, a single season without control can turn a decorative plant into a mass that covers several square meters and climbs over everything it finds in its path. The risk to agriculture is documented. In rural areas of Mexico, Colombia, and Central America, Ipomoea indica invades crops of corn, beans, and other staples, reducing yields significantly and being especially difficult to control because its seeds are resistant to most commonly used herbicides. A detail that distinguishes this species from other less problematic ornamental morning glories. Its seeds contain ergoline compounds, alkaloids related to LSD, which produce symptoms of intoxication if ingested in sufficient quantity. That risk is especially relevant in homes with small children, where the dark and relatively large seeds can arouse curiosity. The combination of invasive behavior, the ability to strangle other plants, and the toxic potential of the seeds makes Ipomoea indica a plant that has no justified place in a family garden. Invasive prickly pear. The nopal and the prickly pear are plants with a deep relationship with the culture and gastronomy of all Latin America. And that cultural familiarity is exactly what makes so many people plant Opuntia species in their gardens without knowing the real risks. Because there is a huge difference between the cultivated nopal that produces edible prickly pears and the Opuntia species that the International Union for Conservation of Nature includes among the 100 most harmful invasive species on the planet. The problem is not the plant itself, it is its dispersal mechanism. The cladodes, the flat segments that form the structure of the plant, detach with the slightest contact and adhere to the clothing, hair, and skin of people and animals. Each detached cladode is a potential complete plant. It can root in any moderately drained soil and produce a new Opuntia in a few weeks. Dogs, coyotes, birds, and the wind are involuntary vectors that carry the cladodes far from the garden of origin, generating colonies in natural lands at distances the gardener would never imagine. The visible spines are only part of the problem. The glochids, the microscopic spines that cover the surface of the cladodes, are practically invisible to the naked eye, but they penetrate the skin with ease and are almost impossible to extract completely. Once in the skin, they fragment when trying to remove them and can cause persistent inflammation and pain for days. In children and pets, accidental contact with an invasive Opuntia can be a traumatic experience. In ecosystems of arid and semi-arid zones, exactly the most common habitats in much of Mexico, northern Argentina, and the coastal areas of the Caribbean, invasive species of Opuntia have replaced native vegetation on surfaces of thousands of hectares, with devastating consequences for the local fauna that depended on that vegetation. The practical distinction that every gardener should know: the Opuntia species cultivated for prickly pear or edible nopal production are generally selected varieties with less invasive capacity, managed in controlled conditions and with agricultural monitoring. The problem arises with wild species or ornamental subspecies sold in nurseries for their striking appearance. Opuntia ficus indica escaped from cultivation. Opuntia delaney, Opuntia stricta, which have a radically greater dispersal capacity. Before buying any species of Opuntia, verify the full scientific name and consult if that specific species is listed as invasive in your region. Castor bean. If someone told you that one of the most toxic plants in the world, more poisonous than the king cobra, more lethal than the venom of the yellow sac spider, is sold with total normality in nurseries throughout Latin America as an ornamental garden plant, you probably wouldn't believe it. However, Ricinus communis is exactly that. A plant with an undeniable decorative presence, with large palmate leaves in dark green or burgundy and striking red fruits, which contains in its seeds one of the most potent natural toxins known to science. Ricin, the compound it produces, was studied for decades by different governments as a possible biological warfare agent. Its mechanism of action is the inhibition of protein synthesis at the cellular level. A few micrograms are enough to cause death in an adult human. There is no antidote. Treatment is exclusively supportive and depends on the speed with which medical intervention is initiated. The concrete danger in a family garden comes from the fruits. They are striking, bright red with dark spots, and can be attractive to small children who mistake them for something edible. The ingestion of 1 to 3 seeds is enough to produce serious symptoms of intoxication in a child. Nausea, vomiting, intense abdominal pain, internal bleeding, with a real risk of death if urgent medical attention is not received. Contact of the sapi with the skin or eyes produces intense irritation. Inhalation of the dust from the seeds during pruning or handling of the plant can cause severe allergic reactions in sensitive people. All this makes Ricinus communis a plant that should not exist in any garden where there are children, pets, or people without specific information about its risks. The question many ask upon hearing this is the same. If it is so dangerous, why is it sold freely in nurseries? The answer is economic and regulatory. Ricinus communis has legitimate industrial uses. The castor oil extracted from the seeds through controlled industrial processing is a lubricant and a component of cosmetic and medical products. And those industrial uses mean the plant has a legal and broad market. The toxicity of raw seeds is not regulated in the same way as a dangerous chemical product, although the concrete risk it represents in a family garden is comparable or greater. Gorse. In the hills around Bogotá, on the Andean slopes of Ecuador, and in the mountain areas of northern Argentina, there is a plant that firefighters and ecologists mention in the same sentence, and it is no coincidence. Ilex europaeus, known as gorse or tojo, has a characteristic that makes it an environmental hazard of the first category. It burns like gasoline. Its branches and leaves contain essential oils in concentrations so high that the plant can spontaneously combust on days of extreme heat. When it catches fire, the temperature it generates is several times higher than that of a normal vegetation fire, which makes fires in areas colonized by gorse extraordinarily difficult to control and devastating for the soil and fauna. In Colombia, gorse is listed as one of the most dangerous invasive species of the Páramo and sub-Páramo ecosystem, ecosystems of enormous importance for the water supply of entire cities. As an invasive plant, it has the same mechanisms that make the ailanthus so difficult to control, but amplified. Its seeds remain viable in the soil for decades. Fire, far from eliminating it, activates the massive germination of stored seeds. After a fire, gorse recolonizes the burned ground before any native species, establishing a competitive advantage that over time becomes impossible to reverse without active intervention. In private gardens, the immediate problem is different. Its spines are long, hard, and extremely sharp, capable of piercing standard gardening gloves. Pruning is an operation that requires industrial-level protection to be done safely. And each pruning, if the cut material is not managed correctly, can generate new plants from the fragments. Gorse is also a plant that is deeply unfair to the ecosystem it invades. It fixes atmospheric nitrogen in the soil through symbiotic bacteria in its roots, which in appearance seems beneficial, but in practice enriches the soil in ways that specifically favor its own seedlings and other invasive species of nitrogen-rich environments, while harming native Páramo plants that evolved in poor soils. It is a plant that literally modifies the chemistry of the soil to make it more favorable to itself and more hostile to everything that existed before it. Don't waste any more time seeing your plants weak, withered, and without resistance. Download your digital book, the great secret behind a resilient plant. Now, and discover how to apply those powerful cares in your day-to-day life. Attention! Access is limited and can disappear quickly. Click now and start your path toward the strong, healthy, and resilient plants you deserve. Hemlock. The last plant on this list is the only one that deserves that place for a reason that goes beyond ecological invasion or structural damage. Conium maculatum, hemlock, is responsible for real deaths in Latin America, including the documented death of an 8-year-old boy in Chile who mistook it for an edible plant. That death was not an isolated case. Hemlock poisonings occur every year in the region, most in people who did not know that the plant they had nearby was deadly. Hemlock is a plant of completely harmless appearance. Its leaves resemble parsley, cilantro, or wild carrot, and that resemblance to common edible plants is precisely its greatest danger. The white umbel flowers it produces in summer are identical in structure to those of many plants in the Apiaceae family grown in orchards and gardens. Without specific botanical knowledge, identifying it correctly is practically impossible for someone without training. All parts of the plant are toxic: roots, stems, leaves, seeds, and flowers. The active compound is conine, an alkaloid that acts on the nervous system, producing ascending muscular paralysis. Symptoms begin with a burning sensation in the mouth, excessive salivation and nausea, and progress in hours toward paralysis of the respiratory muscles. Death occurs by asphyxiation. The process is rapid and, without immediate medical intervention, irreversible. What makes hemlock especially dangerous in urban and peri-urban environments is that it grows spontaneously in unused land, roadsides, abandoned gardens, and areas with moist soil. It is not necessary to plant it intentionally. It can appear on its own. Therefore, identifying it and eliminating it from any space where there are children is not a matter of aesthetic preference, but of basic safety. If you find an umbelliferous plant in your garden or nearby that you do not recognize with certainty, do not touch it until you identify it correctly. And if there are children nearby, keep them away until you confirm what it is. There is an identification signal that botanists teach as a first filter. The stem of the hemlock has purple-reddish spots distributed irregularly, spots that in popular tradition were interpreted as the blood of Socrates, in reference to the Greek philosopher who was executed with this same plant in the year 399 BC. Those spots on the stem, combined with the unpleasant smell the plant gives off when crushed, described as similar to wet mice, are the two most reliable signs to distinguish it from wild parsley or other harmless umbellifers. Knowing that difference can literally save a life. These are the 10 plants that should never enter your garden, and now you know them. Share this video with someone who gardens near you. They may already have some of these plants without knowing it. Download the book at the link in the pinned comment. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next video. If this story changed the way you look at the weeds in your garden, please subscribe and like the channel. We are unearthing the history they tried to bury. Let's plant the future. The next treasure will open soon.